Day 2, Day 10, hyperbolas. So remember, a horizontal hyperbola has the equation x minus h squared over a squared minus, key thing right here is it's a subtraction sign for a hyperbola, the quantity of y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. A is always with the positive squared term, so it always comes first. Vertical hyperbola, you notice that y comes first this time. Be really careful when you are notating the center of your hyperbola because your h and your k's location switched. You notice a still comes first. It's still a subtraction sign. It's always set equal to 1. B squared comes second. Write an equation in standard form. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our squared term and our linear term are next to each other. And in this case, they are for our x's. So we can go ahead and write x squared minus 6x, leave a little space, negative 3y plus 12y, leave a little space. We're going to add our 21 to the opposite side of our equation. We then need to factor out our negative 3. So our x squared minus 6x remains the same, and we can add our box. When we factor out our negative 3, we get y squared minus 4y plus box equals our 21. Make sure you add your boxes to the right-hand side of your equation, and remember your second box, you need to multiply negative 3 times what's in that box, so however you need to remind yourself of that. Our standard form, remember, we have the quantity of x squared minus 3 in this case. We're going to have y, the quantity of y, something squared, is equal. So remember, in this blank right here is your b divided by 2. In your box up here is your b divided by 2 squared. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. We don't have to multiply that box by anything, so we put it on both sides. B divided by 2 for our y is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. Remember, negative 3 times 4 gives us negative 12 on the right-hand side of our problem. When we combine our like terms, we get a positive 18. Remember, for a hyperbola, it needs to be set equal to 1. So to get that, we divide everything by 18. X minus 3 squared over 18 minus 3 over 18 reduces to 6. So we have y minus 2 squared in the numerator, 6 in the denominator equals 1, and we just wrote the equation of our hyperbola in standard form. Example number 2 says write the equation in standard form. So again, our x's are already grouped next to each other. Our y's are already grouped next to each other. So we need to factor out our greatest common factor. So we factor out a 4 for our x's. We're going to factor out a negative 1 for our y so that we get our minus sign in between our two ratios. Y squared becomes negative 8y plus our box. When you move your 24 to the right-hand side of your equation, it becomes positive. We need to set up our standard form of our equation so that we can complete our square. B divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. 4 times 1 gives us a 4 in our box over here on our right-hand side. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. Negative 1 times 16 gives us a negative 16 on our right-hand side. We combined our like terms, so we get a positive 12 on the right-hand side of our equation. So in order to get that equal to 1, we want to divide everything by 12. 4 over 12 reduces to 1 over 3. x minus 1 squared over 3. Subtraction sign because it's a hyperbola. We don't need to reduce anything in that ratio. Equals 1, and we just wrote the standard form of our hyperbola. Equation number 4, you notice that it is out of order. So we first need to group our y's together and then our x's together. Make sure that your positive squared term comes first. So your negative squared term you can place second. If you move your 11 to the opposite side, factor out your greatest common factor. So for our y's, we'll factor out a 4. For our x's, we're going to factor out a negative 1. Because it's a hyperbola, we need a negative in between our two ratios. Add your boxes to the opposite side. And now we need to complete the square. So we are going to have our b divided by 2. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 4 is positive 16. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. Negative 1 times 1 gives us a negative 1 on the right-hand side. When we combined all of our stuff on the right-hand side, we get positive 4. To get it in standard form, we need our hyperbola set equal to 1, so we divide by 4. Y minus 2 squared over 1 minus x minus 1 squared over 4 equals 1. And we just wrote our equation of our hyperbola in standard form. The last thing that they're going to ask us to do is they're going to ask us to write the equation for the hyperbola given some information. So this is working backwards. So what I like to do is I like to underline all the important information. I know my center is at 2, negative 3. So I know this is my h and this is my k. I know that this is going to be a horizontal transverse axis, which means my hyperbola is horizontal, which means x is going to come first in my ratios. And I know my hyperbola has to be set equal to 1. I also know that my value of a is 7 and b is 2. But in my equation, I know I need to know a squared, which would be 49, and b squared, which is 4. I know a squared always comes first for a hyperbola, so I can go ahead and put my 49 in the denominator under my first ratio, my 4 underneath my second ratio. Inside is always opposite. H is always associated with x, so I can go ahead and put a negative 2. Inside is opposite, so I'm going to put a positive 3, and you just wrote the equation for your hyperbola working backwards.